And I think this is part of the healing journey. If you look at especially the way that we're raised as children, we aren't raised in such a way that we feel the world is a safe, compassionate, caring, and attuned place, where we experience that unconditional flow of giving and receiving that allows us to live with a safe and open heart. Many people grow up in an environment where their family unit, their cultural unit, their social unit says, you need to be more, you're not good enough, you're not worthy of love, this is not safe. I mean, if you get those impressions from an early age, you're going to develop strategies in order to extract what you want out of life and defend yourself from being hurt and feeling painful. And obviously that's going to stop that natural flow of giving and receiving, which is our basic nature.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast that explores the creative relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It's a creative exploration through stories, insights, resources, and tools to help you intentionally design your life and work. I'm your host, Brooke Eston, also known as the Creative Amplifier. I'm part strategist, part designer, part coach, and part artist. And I'm dedicated to helping fellow creatives bridge the gaps between those big dreams and practical realities. Now let's get into it. Our guest today is Zamir Dhanji. He's a yoga teacher, storyteller, holistic counselor, and founder of the Mystic Yogi and the Inner Path Yoga Deck. A true creative at heart, Zamir has been strongly influenced by developments in modern biology, physics, and chemistry, as he believes they provide a holistic and paradigm-shifting understanding of the mind-body system, one that complements the scientific knowledge of ancient yogis. Zam and I go way back. He and I grew up together in Thailand and have developed a sacred bond over the decades, starting in high school with joining the student council together, all the way towards projects that we're working on currently today. In this episode, we explore the limiting beliefs that so many of us hold, limiting beliefs like we are not enough or that the world is not a safe place. We dive into how our reactions to trauma often cause us to feel disconnected from nature and disoriented to life. Through deeply personal stories, Zamir leads us through the path that he's taken towards reorienting himself to life, death, and finding a true sense of purpose. From rejecting traditional studies on international relations, to traveling the world with an empty wallet, to sharing sacred final moments with his beloved grandfather, Zamir shares his revelations about the cycle of giving, the life practice of learning to give and receive freely from an abundant heart in spite of worldly traumas. Join us as we creatively envision what a world can look like when we all open ourselves to this interconnected lifestyle and abundance of joy. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found podcast, Zamir. I'm so thrilled to have you on today.
I'm really happy to be here as well, Brooke. Long time coming.
Indeed. So you and I go way back, further back than I go with most people, because we went to high school in Thailand together, and not a lot of people have that shared experience. And what I remember of you in high school was being incredibly ambitious, very type A, very capable. Like there's no question in my mind whether or not you could do it. It was just a matter of, did you want to or not? And I had this idea in my mind of you that you would go on to be a politician or a international business person or some very type A, high-powered, I dominate other people type role. And after being separated for many years, you went to university in a very different part of the world than I did. We reconnected, and you had gone deep into your spiritual journey. And you were so focused on your inner world and your spiritual relationship and God and everything that was wrapped up in that whole world worth exploring. And I would love to just dive in. What happened to you? How did that transformation occur and why?
Well, as you said, in high school, I was definitely quite a different person. By grade 12, I was sort of a jock, a shaved head, motorbike, but also very academic and intellectual. We served on the student council together, as you reminded me, which was a super interesting experience. I remember that time when we were together, where we wanted to have the school uniform replaced with something that would allow everybody to wear whatever they wanted in school. And I did research into how we would frame the argument to present to the administrators that would show that having no restrictions on what children wore to school would increase their creativity and their critical thinking, and how this was a value of American education and something that we worked on and didn't succeed. And there was a part of me throughout high school that I loved to challenge, and I felt like quite rebellious, and I felt I could use my mind and my intellect to be able to convince people to see things the way that I saw them. Right.
Yeah.
And that became a huge part of my identity. When you find that you start to have a strength, you start to play to that strength, and you identify yourself with that strength as to like, this is who I am. But like anything in life, these strengths can be a double-edged sword. And that was a double-edged sword for me. I remember when my spiritual transformation actually began right after I graduated. I fell in love with a woman in high school, and we were in a long distance relationship. And a year into that long distance relationship, when I was going to come back to see her, she stopped communicating with me entirely, and I was like, very in love with her. I writing letters every month, and I even went to the house of Romeo and Juliet and carved our names on a brick on their wall, kind of, that kind of thing. And you're done, right?
Yeah.
And it was transformative for me because it was the first time I felt that someone else was truly so much more important than me. Like this agent of like, I want to give to this person. I want to see this person happy. I want to see this person loved. Throughout that high school experience, it's sort of in my little bubble, my world. Yeah. It's me, and mine, right? And so this love really also helped me access that feminine side, you might say. I started to write poetry. I started to look at how could I craft images or items of beauty that would make someone light up. Things that, in my sort of more intellectual, ambitious, sports-oriented world was like very contrary, right? But I started to find like, well, this is evoking all these things in me. And it also came at a time where I was in Italy. I was exposed to art history. I took courses in Eastern philosophy. I encountered Buddhism and Taoism. I read the Celestine Prophecy, and my heart was open. That's what's different. It wasn't just an intellectual thing, because the love had opened my heart. And these things that came into my mind had a fertile, open heart to kind of sink into. But what happened is that she stopped talking to me after a year. And when I went back to Thailand, she wouldn't communicate with me until one day my brother invited me down, and I saw her with another man, and that just crushed me. And that heartbreak definitely impacted me deeply. It was the first time I just, I experienced depression, and I felt like I went into that for some time. And I remember having a very stark realization that about a year and a half later, I was walking through Central Park, and I realized in that moment that the love that I had experienced with her actually came from inside of me. That this love flowed through me. And now that I wasn't with her, it didn't mean that it couldn't flow again. And I became really curious because I had started reading, Sufi poetry, like Rumi and mystical poetry. And, I would remember reading stuff that they had written about God and their relationship with love and the beloved. And I was like, I know what that feels like, but I only know that for this person. But they seem to know that for all of existence. Like that's their state of being. And I was like, wow, like they live in that place? Like,
Yeah, give me some of that.
Exactly. I said, whatever that is, I'd find that again. And so it really tweaked something in my heart because I had a context where I was like, I could relate to it. I could relate to it out of personal experience, both the ecstasy and also the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And that became a big part of my journey, And so I feel that my spiritual journey was sort of seeded in grief and in heartbreak, but also in creativity and beauty at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's part of the experience of grief, right? Because you're grieving something, you feel the loss, the pain, all of the emotions that come with losing something that you didn't want to lose. But the pain comes from losing something really valuable and really precious and really meaningful. And so you're feeling all of those experiences at the same time, which makes grief such a tangled web or a knot that just seems almost impossible to untangle. From that moment, how did you then, from the moment where you had that realization and you knew that there was something bigger and more expansive and accessible because you had seen these other people, read about these other people being able to live in that place. How did you journey there? And what was that journey like?
It would be hard to say it in a way that would accurately capture. I mean, really, all of us are on this labyrinthine, myriad, mixed pathways that we wander down. I think we're all kind of wanderers. And, there's this beautiful symbol of the journey of enlightenment in Buddhism that I first encountered in Thailand. It's a symbol called the Unalom. And I don't know if you know what the Unalom is, but it starts in the center and it's a spiral motion. And it goes in a spiral and then it does one loop on the right, another loop on the left, another loop on the right, and then it goes as a single line back up. And you could have many loops and there's different versions of it. But I came to understand the meaning of this symbol, which is that in the beginning, we have this spiral that we move through, which is like the churning of our karma. Like in the beginning of our journey in early life, we encounter all these intense kind of chaotic experiences, and we're in this sort of karmic collision chamber where, we're trying to learn all these lessons about, our who we are and our ego and, what we want and what we don't want and our passions and our desires, and all these things just get kind of crashed in until we start to develop wisdom and we go through these experiences and things start to level out a bit. And then our life lessons become these like larger, simpler arcs that we take at these different stages of maturity.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a universal human journey, right? Until at the top, the line becomes one pointed towards our spiritual nature, towards our enlightenment or our wakefulness, as Buddha calls it. Or God, whatever you want to call it, where we just realize, we've had all these experiences in life, fulfilled all these desires, and now we just want the source. We want the source of all desire. We want the source of fulfillment. We want to just be truly who we are in our natural state. And I feel that, my journey went through that same process of, I was in different relationships and I traveled to different places and met all these different teachers and, got involved in, business ventures and community ventures and, all these things that at the end of the day in Sanskrit is called a Leela. Leela is a divine play. It's this notion that that life is just a play, just like how Shakespeare says it, right? All men and women are simply players, right? And that we're walking upon this stage. And so, I feel like I just was in this play of experience that my life and mind was creating for me to learn the lessons that I came here to learn. And it took me to so many places. I would say a big part of it came when I dropped out of university and I went to China, and I started to travel. That was a big
Yeah.
transformational experience for me.
Yeah. How far were you into university before you dropped out? And why? Like, what was the catalyst for that?
Well, I completed my second year, and like you said, in high school, I also had more of like a type A. I'm going to be in international relations and business, and
Yeah.
I thought, my goal when I was young is I wanted to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. I was like, that's what
Yeah.
I'm going to be in my life, right? And so
Yep.
go to NYU, and I realized as I'm taking classes in economics and international relations that something in me has changed. Like, I don't believe in this stuff anymore. You go to international relations and it's based on game theory, which is basically a prisoner's dilemma. It's rooted in a view of nations being actors that are only rooted in their self-interest,
Mm-hmm.
and it is not based on a humanitarian vision of international cooperation, of human goodness and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And as I start to realize, well, this is the game that you have to play to be successful in the field of international politics, I said, that's not for me. I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up dropping out of that course because of debates I had with my professor where it was like, they're like, this is how it is.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened for me in economics class. It was a New York ivory tower economics where professors just live in their own, academic worlds, and the economics, which is really a system that's designed to serve people, to meet
Yeah.
their needs, right, and to meet society's multifold needs for growth and development, really becomes an abstracted economic model with assumptions based on human beings like cogs in a wheel that are driven by these self-interested desires. And I didn't agree with the assumptions of the model. And if you don't agree with assumptions of the model, then you can't really participate in it because
Yeah, it's a non-starter.
it's a non-starter. And as I was debating these things with my professors, they're like, if you don't agree with these assumptions, then you shouldn't be here because what are you doing here? And I really took that to heart. I was like, what am I doing here? I don't believe in this stuff anymore. And so that's what sort of led me to drop out. I didn't tell my parents that. I just told them I was taking a year off. And that sent me on my journey. I went to Thailand. I took $100 from my dad, and I met some ex-Israeli military folks, and we got on motorbikes and traveled through Thailand. And I had a friend from New York who said he might be able to get me a job teaching English in China. So I ended up getting on a bus and traveling overland through Laos and hitchhiking, doing magic tricks to pay my way through through
I
China.
remember.
Fortunately, I grew up in Hong Kong as well, so I learned to speak Chinese fluently. So I was able to do that. So I make my way through China on, basically, magic and charming people with an Indian Chinese. And I ended up in Kunming City because my friend bailed on me, and I still found a job teaching English. And that became quite a remarkable experience for me because through these journeys, I had contact with the common people. When you go to international school, you live in a gated community, you go to a gated international school, people are wealthy, their parents have these nice jobs, you have maids and drivers, and you kind of live on a golden spoon.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy to have your view of the world shaped in a way that actually is only a product of your privilege.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so what happened through this is that I had to rely upon the most common people for my safety, for my sustenance, for my connection. And I began to see the profound generosity of the people who had so little.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people who have least that are willing to give the most and
Yeah.
open their homes and doors to you. And I became, deeply contacted with tribal cultures. And it started to seed in me as I did my travels, and I received gifts from people from unknown places that allowed me to continue on my journey because I was just vulnerable to life, that led
Mm.
me to places that enriched my spirit, I started to see life as this flow of giving and receiving. And that there was this
Mm.
creative spiritual force that would carry us in moments that were completely unexpected. That if we were just open
Yeah.
to it and we made ourselves vulnerable to life, that life would magically conspire to, take us into the next phase of our journey. And for me, life
Mhm.
started to become this great adventure. Um, and I remember going back to school with this intention to look at economics differently. And I had encountered a book by E.F. Schumacher called Small is Beautiful. And it was around the Buddhist economics of Burma. And I wanted to create, so I decided to create a major called spiritual economics. And that became the next part of my academic inquiry.
That I remember also. I wasn't aware of all the backstory leading up to that, but I remember when we reconnected in Thailand, many years later, and you telling me about that, and it transporting me back to the Zamir that I knew. Like, you had this ability to create a world that other people could enter into. So even with the uniform example that we spoke about, you painted this world of free, creative, nourished, independent thinkers. And in my mind, I thought, yeah, but we're just students. We have to just do what the administration tells us, no? And you created this whole world that you allowed other people to then enter into. And unfortunately, in that situation, that was not the world that the decision makers wanted to live in. But it seems like your journey also is a big part of that is in creating that space for yourself and creating this totally different world and experience that is a product of your own imagination, right? Like, you didn't have to leave your privilege and your comfort to put yourself in that situation, but you created that space for yourself to then enter into and explore.
Yeah, as you're saying this, and I go a bit back down, memory lane, there were two very important moments when I dropped out of school that impacted me. One was encounter with a book called The Rebel by Osho. And this book really impacted me because he said that the rebel is the most important person in the transformation of society. Because what Osho taught is that if you look out into the world, so called society, all you see are actually individuals. There is no such society. We're all individuals, and the individual consciousness works together to make up of what we call and experience as society. And that the rebel is someone who is fundamentally creative in their consciousness. And this creativity of the individual is absolutely essential for their own liberation, but the liberation of others around them, right? And this creative spark is so essential, and that it's rooted in a spiritual understanding. He had painted an ideal, which he called Zorba the Buddha. Zorba is from Zorba the Greek, who was a man who lived on the fiery pulse of his instinct. When he would sing when he felt like singing. He would dance when he felt like dancing. If he felt like making love, he would woo the woman who had, attracted his eye. He just lived true to his impulses, to his sentiments, right? The other side is the Buddha, and the Buddha is cool, calm, collected, has maturity and wisdom and insight. And he said, when these two forces come together, this is the essence or the soul of the rebel, who is creative, who is passionate, who is inspired, and also mindful, meditative, mature, filled with compassion, right? And he said, when these qualities come together in an individual, this becomes a transformative force in society, right? And that deeply impacted me. I said, wow, this is a beautiful synthesis. Um, the other thing that really impacted me was an event that happened when I was in Vietnam. I had been with my girlfriend at the time, and she got bit by a monkey, and she needed rabies vaccines, and I sort of insisted that we get them. But it changed our whole course of Vietnam. Initially, I'd bought a motorbike and I wanted to travel by motorbike through the country, but we couldn't do that because we had to literally transport our rabies vaccines with us in a cooler in the summer of Vietnam. It ended up ruining our relationship, actually, the pressure of the whole thing with no money at all, and coolers of rabies vaccines on these, rickety old buses. But we end up in Ho Chi Minh City in Saigon, and we ran out of money. I had no money for my hotel, and I had no money to get out of the country or to pay for the extension of our visa. I was like, oh my God, what are we going to languish in a jail cell in Vietnam? What's going to happen here? Didn't sound appealing. So I end up on the street busking. And there was a guy who used to joke with me. He used to call me Aladdin because, I have a bit of an Aladdin look, right? And he was the only one who spoke English. He used to say, "Where's your monkey, Aladdin?" So then
you're like, don't talk to me about monkeys right now.
Yeah, exactly. So this time I'm busking. I said, this time I'm, Aladdin's trying to make a bit of coin. Will he translate for me? So he did, and I had a little hat, and I just started drumming. And nobody really gave us anything. There was one woman who gave us some money, and she said, "This is part of my generosity," and that she didn't say my generosity. She said, "This is my well wishes that now other people will start to give." It's part of an Eastern mentality. Like, the first sale of the day, you will give thanks to the person who bought your first thing because it's a sign of like good fortune to come. Right? Yeah. Or they might give you a discount.
The door is now open.
The door is now open. So she's like, now I'm going to open the door for you. Okay. And she opens that. But that door didn't open to a great deal of abundance. We're talking about Vietnamese currency. I mean, I have a couple of bucks maybe, by the end.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is not going to work. And so I stop and I pull out my fire poi. I started fire dancing, and the police come and they say, "You're not allowed to do this." And my girlfriend at the time, she was a rebel. If any authority told her not to do anything, she would just do it. So that woman who had first given me money sees them and she says, "What do you do with these?" And I explained that you dance with fire with them. She says, "I want to see it." I said, "Well, I don't have any money for gas and I don't know where to get it." She says, "Don't worry." This is all translated, by the way, by my little, Aladdin friend. And so she goes and she comes back 20 minutes later and they're soaked in gasoline in plastic bags. And against the police wishes, my girlfriend, she lights them on fire and the police jump out of the way. She starts to swing them around and I start to drum to build energy. And all these people begin to gather, like 50, then 100, then 150. And this park starts to fill with people as we're putting on a fire show in the park. And at the end of it, the police slink away because we have such a crowd of people that have joined. And I realized that there was sort of an anti-police protest that had just happened. So they were kind of scared of the crowd. So this woman felt very happy with her mini rebellion that she had incited in the park. And she tells us not to go anywhere. And she comes back almost an hour later. I didn't think she was going to come back. And she puts an envelope in my hand. And she said, "This is part of our Buddhist belief that if we help others, this is good karma." And so she gave it to me and I opened it and it had $100 in it. And this is just a regular woman in Vietnam. I mean, that's a lot of money. Right. Yeah. I mean, imagine someone giving someone 4,000 baht in Thailand. Like it's a fair bit of money. And she was, in her 60s or something. And so this was more than enough money for me to get out of Vietnam, make my way through Cambodia, get back into Thailand. I mean, it was pretty remarkable. And about 2 months later, I'm in India and I go to do my first meditation retreat. It's a Vipassana meditation. And there were some Vietnamese monks who were there. And at the end of the 10 days of meditation, I tell them this story. I was like, I have to tell you this happened to me in Vietnam. And she said it was part of our Buddhist belief and you're Vietnamese Buddhist monks. And I got to tell you. And they said, it's interesting. He says, "Do you have the envelope that she gave you the money in?" I said, "I'm not sure." So I went to check my little travel pouch and it was tucked there in the corner after all these months. And he unfolds it and he looks at the address. He says, "I know where this place is. It's right next to where our temple is in Vietnam." He says, "I'm the head monk and I get to go back every 4 years. I'm going back this year. Why don't you give me something to give her?" I said, "Wow, that would be amazing." Okay. So he gives me his address. which being as I was at the time, I promptly lose and filled with regret. I feel like I've lost the invitation because they said that they're going back, they're leaving the next day. A couple of days later, I'm hiking in the mountains. I bump into the monks again. They happen to extend their stay. So they give me their address again. And so I got her this sandalwood jewelry box and I wrote her a letter to be translated that he said he'd translate into Vietnamese. And I, trust that this head monk was going to knock on this woman's door and deliver her a gift from an Indian boy that she helped months ago in Vietnam as part of her Buddhist belief, and that it came back to her. And this experience deeply imprinted me. It deeply imprinted me, where I started to see life is this flow of giving and receiving. And many years later, I came to the teachings of a man named Walter Russell. And he talks about this as the universal law of love, and that it's the law of creativity. And this law of creativity is that every part of nature gives and then equally re-gives to keep the creative process continuing. If you look at the cycle of the water cycle, right? You look at the natural cycles of the plants and of the earth. Everything is in a cycle of giving of itself, receiving, and then giving of itself again, simply to keep the creative process going. And that's how a single seed in the ground can become an entire forest, because there's a ceaseless flow of giving and receiving. And this is part of nature. This is the law of creativity, of the consciousness of the universe. And I said, wow, this is remarkable. Like, what if I could become more and more attuned to this? This could be part of the transformation of our planet. We just need to learn how to give and receive with an abundant heart. And that's been a big part of my life's journey, to understand it on an intellectual level and also overcome my own ego barriers, my own fears, my own insecurities, my own blocks, so that I can be open to this flow of giving and receiving, which is the path of service and creativity. And that's largely defined my life and, my quest to understand. How does this work, and how can we create a world where this becomes more and more natural to us? Because this is who we are. This is how nature is.
Yeah. Wow, that is so profound. I felt, when you were sharing that story, I felt chills in my whole body, like the kind of chills that last, not the chills that just pass through. I wonder what happened to that woman. Did you ever hear from those monks again, or did you? Nothing. It's just
trust.
into the flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of trust, that leads me to my next question, which I think is the question, which is, why is it so hard for us to do something that is so inherently natural to us?
Yeah, that's very much, I think, rooted in what I came to understand through that book, The Rebel, which is we are products of society. And society is a product of the artifice of the human mind. And the human mind, according to the Buddha's teaching, is always caught in the duality of either seeking the fulfillment of its desire through craving, or aversion to that which it believes will bring it pain or suffering. Right? Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, we live according to this fabricated identity, right?
Yeah.
That tells us that we're separate from life, right? And that the world isn't a safe place. And I feel that at the root of it is this deep feeling that we are disconnected. We are disconnected from the natural pulse of life, and we're disconnected from who we are.
Yeah.
One thing that I learned from the teachings of Gabor Mate, because he really has been influenced by Buddhism as well, spiritual teachings. And he says, the Buddha teaches us that our minds create our world. We also have to understand how the world has created our minds. And that's where the understanding of our trauma comes in. Because trauma is not something that happens to you. It's something that happens inside of you. And that's so important to understand, because two people can undergo the same situation and one person will be traumatized by it and the other person won't. So it's this internal response that imprints our memory, Okay. Now, there's this almost existential trauma that all of us human beings have, okay, which influence us. And this is part of the sacred wound that if we, I feel that a lot of our gift and our healing comes through coming into contact with our wounds, actually, and through transforming and accepting these wounds and healing through it, we are able to give more fully to the world.
That's the essence of this podcast, is about creative recovery and transformation. But you can't transform before you have dealt with that stuff, right? In order to heal the wound, you have to clean it. You have to get out the things that are irritating it and infecting it so that you can then care for it and learn to heal.
Absolutely. And I think this is part of the healing journey that,
Yeah.
because you go ask the question, well, why can't we just, if it's so natural to us, then why can't we exist that way? It's largely because if you look at especially the way that we're raised as children, we aren't raised in such a way that we feel the world is a safe, compassionate, caring, and attuned place where we experience that unconditional flow of giving and receiving that allows us to live with a safe and open heart. Many people grow up in an environment where their family unit, their cultural unit, their social unit says, you need to be more. You're not good enough. You're not worthy of love. This is not safe. I mean, if you get those impressions from an early age, you're going to develop strategies in order to extract what you want out of life and defend yourself from being hurt and feeling painful. And obviously, that's going to stop that natural flow of giving and receiving, which is our basic nature. Right?
Yeah.
The Buddha teaches the Dharma, and this Dharma is intended to deprogram our mind so that we can return back to that natural state, so that our natural capacities for gentleness, kindness, compassion, unconditional love, which is from the flowering of our being, can then feed out into our life and bring us the causes and conditions of the life that we want. But in order to do that, we have to listen to those teachings. We have to understand our own wounding and our own pain and do the work so that natural state can come through. I don't know if you know this story of the Golden Buddha, but in Ayutthaya, which used to be the capital of Thailand, they had this beautiful golden Buddha, but they didn't want it to be stolen. So what they did is that they covered it with cement and straw. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when the raiders came, they never touched it because it just looks like a regular cement Buddha. So then when the capital moved from Ayutthaya to Bangkok, this piece was taken and installed in a temple. One day, a chip falls off of it, and someone notices a little speck of something gleaming inside. So they begin to chip away at it. And as they do, they realize that it's actually a fully golden Buddha underneath. And this golden Buddha then gets raised and installed and this becomes a very sacred site, a sacred visit, right? And it's remarkable that we all have the same story inside of us. We all have a golden Buddha inside of us. But to protect ourselves, we cover ourselves with something that's hard. And we have to chip. Once we get a little chip and we see that golden nature, we're like, wait a minute, we got gold in there? And we got to keep chipping away. And what happens is that our golden Buddha nature gets revealed. And that's a life process and journey for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that part of the way that you do that chipping away and cultivating is through your yoga practice. So for a lot of people, at least a lot of people who listen to this podcast are most likely in the West, and their first introduction to yoga was not focused on the spiritual aspects, but more on the physical body exercise health benefits of yoga. So can you help bring us into what is yoga and how does yoga help with that transformation?
According to Patanjali, which he's kind of the father of the language and teaching of yoga in the mainstream way, Patanjali says that yoga is samadhi. Yoga is the state, is our natural state as pure consciousness. That is yoga. And then the practices and the teachings that bring us to become established in that state and to recognize it is the practice of yoga. So yoga is two things. One, it's a state of consciousness. The other is the teachings and practices and that establish us in that consciousness. The yoga is both those things. I've had a teacher for over a decade now. Her name is Wisdom Master Matikantin, and she's a master of what's called Ati Yoga, which is primordial yoga. And this primordial yoga has existed, she calls them primordial teachings. They've existed from the beginning of time. These teachings have existed from the primordial consciousness that has somehow infused its divine nature and intelligence into all of the cosmos. It's brought into every fiber of our being. It's not outside of us. It's inside of us. It's in all things. It's just we have to become one with it. And the more that we become one with it, the more we get these profound downloads of like, wow, how vast and remarkable this is. It's so close to us. And our yoga practice is meant to be this journey of seeing and experiencing this vast intelligence and compassionate energy of the universe, and recognizing step by step all the obstacles we build against being able to be in harmony with it. And so I feel that, what yoga does that's very profound and radical is that it goes right to the heart and says, you are the golden Buddha. You are that pure nature. This is who you are, without question, without a doubt. All other things are part of the conditional world. Now, how does one come into concert and in harmony with that which is undying?
Ain't that the question?
Yeah. And this is the soul seeks that freedom, seeks that liberation. And yoga says there's a path to this. And this is actually the journey of every soul to realize its own nature, without question, without a doubt, even from the smallest ant up to the human being. Everybody's part of this spiral unfolding journey in its myriad forms through many, many different lifetimes to realize it's who it is, what it is. It's as an aspect of that creative consciousness or Godhead.
Mm-hmm. So in taking the vastness of what you're describing and bringing it down into perhaps smaller pieces or tools or practices to make it more accessible for people, one of the tools that you developed is this incredible Inner Path deck. It is based on yoga philosophy, and it is not only epically beautiful, but a really powerful teacher. So can you share a little bit about how this deck came to be, what your process was, how did you decide to do this, and then what role do you think that tools like this can play in helping people along their journey?
Absolutely, yeah. Firstly, I've always been fascinated with, always is a long word, really maybe over the last 10 or 12 years, with mystical creativity. Mm. And mystical creativity is more through improvisation and spontaneity. I became deeply influenced by this term coined by Chogyam Trungpa. He calls it Dharma art. And Dharma art is sort of seeing life as a play and performance of the improvisational nature of life. Okay, and it's quite remarkable. I mean, you might just, if you think of Zen style flower arranging, you spontaneously see these flowers, you bring them together, and you kind of get to see the form, and you place it in a place, and you see the play of light on the leaf and the aroma, and everything just becomes like this living art. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with our life. Like our life can become a work of art. And the more that I began to see how Eastern principles of yoga and spirituality were unified with its approach to art and creativity, the more that I began to feel like, wow, how amazing would it be if my life could become more like an art? And that's always been sort of an ideal. I mean, in reality, yeah, we are still, fumbling human beings filled with foibles, and if people really looked at our life, it probably wouldn't be so graceful and artistic. But we can make art out of it anyways.
Yeah.
So that being said, I I felt that actually creating a work of art, though, is something that I found anchored these like kind of lofty principles into like a real world thing that other people could experience, and that's
Yeah.
something that I would do through musical events or through artistic productions and things like that. But I never created a physical product, you know.
Mm.
And I remember one day I opened this do-it-yourself kind of book, like a DIY thing, and I opened it, and I opened it to a page, and it said, "Create your own tarot." And I was like, I could totally do that. You know, I've been fascinated with divination systems for years, from the I Ching to runes to oracle decks. Divination is one of the most ancient forms of aligning ourselves with the mind of the cosmos, like with the intelligence of the natural world, with our subconscious intelligence, right? And so when I thought about that, I said, well, what I do it on? And I had begun yoga teacher trainings at Langara College. And I was like, you know what? There's such an obstacle for students to engage with this profound teaching and philosophy of yoga because it it's all in book form. If you haven't really studied much about yoga philosophy and the depth of these teachings, and someone says, okay, well, in the next 2 weeks you got to read the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. I mean, these are texts that people spend lifetimes studying, right? So
Yeah.
people just like they glance a little bit, but they don't get to actually integrate it.
Mhm.
And what I like about divination tools is that it's a short thing. You draw a card or you cast a reading, and you get to contemplate it, and it's related to your life situation. And truth be told, the most interesting subject for all of us is ourselves. So if it's related to us, we're like, okay, so what does this have to do with me, right? So it sticks. So I thought, this is a great combination. I'm going to create a yoga tarot, a yoga oracle based on the philosophy of yoga. And the 8 limbs of yoga is, the most scientific exposition of the practice of yoga. And I felt, well, if we could bring it with art and creativity, art and science, when they come together, I feel like it's just a divine union. So I thought,
Mhm.
well, let's take the science and bring it together with the art. And that became the birth of this inner path deck as a tool for people to engage with and understand this profound science of yoga, but apply it to their lives in a creative way through artistic reflections.
Mhm. Yeah. And how have you seen its impact?
It's pretty new, so I am still getting feedback from people. So far, it's been pretty overwhelmingly positive. What has been created is just like the first phase of a tool, right? Like
Yeah.
this is just a gateway. I envision it there being an online platform where this can open to people to new ways of interacting with yoga
Mhm.
philosophy. I mean, a big part of the inspiration behind this was recognizing that so many people have become visual learners now.
Yeah.
The old way of learning was more through memorization and through
Mhm.
reading. And now we're moving through image and video. So the
Yeah.
philosophy and teachings of yoga have to adapt with how people are learning. So
Mhm.
I foresee this moving into the digital realm with, 3D animations, with ways for people to interact with the philosophy through art, through sound. So I see this tool as a gateway to a whole new possibility in world of, spiritual knowledge and experience through digital mediums.
Mhm. Yeah, such an exciting landscape. I mean, even just the projects that we've explored together are things that I can feel in my body the energy. And I dream about these worlds that we were talking about creating and visualizing at night when I'm sleeping. Like it's something so penetrative that it just feels essential and it feels inevitable.
Absolutely. It really does. And it was
Yeah.
so wonderful to see people take this concept of aligning with the divine And how does it taste? And how does it touch? And how does it feel? How does it look like, right? And this taking this philosophical concept and bringing it into a creative process where people get to see how does it relate into my life, I feel is so important. Like we need to create more bridges like that, where it's like people are integrating it in some experiential way.
Yeah. I like that concept of a bridge. And I think as I'm reflecting on this now, knowing where we started this conversation and how we know each other, it feels like perhaps we're in not completely unique, but somewhat unique positions as world bridgers, because we understand these very different experiences and ways of thinking and culture and just, a very different world, that by acting as that bridge, maybe that is part of our dharma, is to help provide some structure for people to walk over as they go through their journey of creative recovery and transformation, which ultimately gets them back to their essence that has been there all along.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And no matter what, that bridge is going to be in the inner landscape of our heart and mind. We're still traversing something that we can only see glimpses of, and we need to trust in the glimpse that we see, just like that crack in the Buddha. Someone sees just that little glimpse, and you have to trust those little glimpses that you get, and focus on opening more of what's in the way, so that that glimpse can then become a full radiant form, and keep trusting in that. That faith is so important. It's like, have you seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones?
Of course.
Where he Indiana Jones has to cross the bridge to get the Grail for his father. And he picks that dust up and he throws it on the abyss, and it just scatters across and reveals the bridge. And he's like, okay, but then it goes away. And you're like, oh my God, like, I have to trust that I saw it and that is there. Okay, so I'm going to walk it with that faith, right? Yeah. And that's so much part of the process of life. But it gives us character. It gives us character. It gives us individuality when we just, we toss it, we see it, we know it's there. Okay, let's walk it, right? And I think if we can be examples of saying we're walking it, and we're showing you that you can walk it too. And that's, I think, one of the greatest gifts that we can give as people. Which is to fulfill our own creative possibility, to fulfill the potential of our consciousness, to flower, because that gives other people permission to do the same, right? If we want to transform society, be a vital person, inspired by the gift of life, inspired by the beauty around us and the consciousness that is our nature. And that gives other people the sense of, I want to be that way too. I want to access that too, right? And through that, they're going to create a more beautiful world, right? And what more can we trust in but that? I mean, that's what I came to realize, that through my work in spiritual economics, that the world needs an interface, or I would say a dialogue between two things. One is structure and the other is consciousness, right? And that what we have are structures that are born out of a consciousness that is obsolete, that is not rooted in these spiritual teachings and understandings of like the wisdom of how life actually is. And so what happens is they can't give rise to anything much higher than that, right? Like Buckminster Fuller says, rather than try to change existing systems, create something new that renders the old one obsolete, right? Yeah. That if you creating out of a new consciousness, then people will, as they reach that, they see that it's more true and beautiful, they're going to want to participate in it. But the only way they can do that is that if they start to also elevate their consciousness themselves. Otherwise, they'll revert back to what's comfortable and what's known. Yeah. And so we need this dual thing where we're lifting our consciousness, and from there we're creating different structures that support this new consciousness. Because there are times where someone really elevates their consciousness, but all they have to interface with are these old structures that don't really mirror who they've become. And then there's this angst, right? But this tension, this creative tension, is part of what I think creates growth and evolution in society. I mean, you've seen it over the Me Too movement or what's happened with George Floyd. I mean, these social revolutions happen about where people's consciousness raised and they're like, we don't accept this old system anymore. So now we have to dialogue to kind of change the system. But if the structure of the system changes, what happens is that people's consciousness also needs to be there to say, you know what, we can live within this new structure now. Now we have to change how we are if we want this new structure to actually, hold weight. And this is part of the dialogue that we're doing, with nature and culture and society in order to bring about a different world.
Yeah. So for somebody who's listening to this, who is feeling all the feels right now, like they had the chills, they had that feeling of expansion in their chest, they feel like, yes, I want that also. How would somebody start moving in that direction? What does the first few steps look like for somebody in order to at least start this lifelong process?
I would say find something that you love and give yourself to that. You'll start to expand and grow. And I think that that's really important. And I would encourage people to meditate, to develop a mindfulness practice, just because it's a way of you coming into contact with yourself that is on a deeper level of experience. And it's so important. It's so important to be able to be comfortable witnessing how you are the creator of your own life, and both in the murky parts of it, but also in the brilliant parts of it. Like, we need the capacity to be with ourselves. And I feel that that's very important for someone to do. So I think it's this combination of finding something that you love and giving yourself to it, and then becoming aware of how you are creating your life experience, your thoughts, your emotions, how you are a creator of your life. And if you just start to get curious into the experience of your body and mind and emotions, and how the world outside of you is a reflection of the world that you create and carry inside of you, the more you're going to start to feel empowered to say, you know what, I can create the life that I want, But you gotta look within, right? And if you're going to do some action without, do something that has some beauty to it, because it'll lift you up.
Yeah. So in closing here, I would love for you to share the story of your grandfather and the experience that you had late last year, that you had where it gave you a really up close and personal and deeply interconnected experience with both the finite experience that our bodies have, but also the timeless nature of the impact that we have on the world. And if you're open to it, I would love for you to share a little bit about that experience and the role of witnessing that, what role that has played in your evolution at this point in your life.
Well, my grandfather's name is Pritham Singh, and Pritham means the beloved. My grandfather was a lover. He was an artist. He was a lover. He worked in government, but in all his spare time, he hosted radio shows on Indian music. He wrote articles, humorous articles, cultural articles. He was part of many different interfaith and multicultural societies. He was in theater. He really worked to be a bridge between the Indian culture and, you might say, the Western culture. And he was quite a cosmopolitan man, and his sense of legacy was very important. He had books of all the articles that he'd written and radio shows that he'd taped, and he would love to share them with us. And as kids were always like, oh, we don't want to see another one of Nana's articles, another one of his radio shows, and right? So we would kind of entertain it, not realizing that in subtle ways he was sort of showing us that this is part of your heritage too. right? Like you can be this as well. He was filled with this joie de vivre that, would inspire people, right? And after he passed, we got to see how many he touched simply by who he was. So he instilled in us the Sikh values of integrity, of charity, of remembrance of God. But also, he wasn't deeply into the religious thing. I mean, he participated when it was musical or creative, but otherwise, he wore a turban, but he didn't believe in the dogma either. And so he really left us this a freedom that at the same time was rooted in that which was really timeless and actually had depth of a culture. He decided to go off dialysis after a number of years, and it had compromised his quality of life. And it so happened that the universe conspired that his whole family could be around him. I mean, his brother and daughter-in-law from Thailand, his grandchildren from LA and Toronto, the ones from Vancouver, like we all gathered. And it was like 14 of us in the midst of COVID in one little house that was shared between two houses right next to each other, with this beautiful bubble of tending to my grandfather in the last 10 days of his life. And we would sit with him. He would sing songs, tell us stories, make us laugh. We got to cry on his knee. And when he decided he was going, he got off dialysis. He was in his small room, and we were the ones to tend to him. We cleaned him. We bathed him. We changed him. And we watched him die over 3 days. And it was remarkable to see this transition. At the end, I was the one to administer the final injection to relieve him of some of the shock that he was experiencing when he had difficulty breathing. And we were all gathered around him chanting Satnam Vaheguru, which means, the true name, connecting to God and the Creator. And we were all chanting in this rhythmic vibration, filling the room with the spiritual energy, which was what he had given to us as a gift. He would always chant this. He brought us into the recitation and remembrance of the divine. And all of us as a family were gathered around chanting, almost like it was like an Avatar kind of movie, as he left his body. And it deeply impacted all of us because we felt that this physical casing had ended, but his soul just expanded, and we witnessed it. And we were all there to witness him for this magical process of him being relieved, being released. And it was so beautiful. It was the most beautiful, death is life and life is death. And the creative spirit is unending. And it feels like, I've had experiences with my grandfather since where I feel his spirit and his joy and lightness. And it really impacted me. And I made a couple important decisions in my life after that event that I won't speak to now. But, these kind of experiences impact your soul. Yeah. And death can be that beautiful, if we really connect from the soul.
Yeah. I think about how different the world would be if we could have that type of relationship with death. Because most of what we hear around death is just pain and fear and discomfort and suffering and all of these things that sure can be part of the experience, but is certainly not the entirety of it. So thank you for speaking to that. And I'm hopeful that can give people a different perspective to consider around death. Absolutely.
And I feel that this is some of the most important work we can do as a culture. Michael Meade, he's a great mythologist, and he says, basically as a culture, we're disoriented towards life and we're disoriented towards death. And that means we're disoriented towards the whole thing in between. Once we have an orientation to life, what is life? What is the essence of life, the pulse of life, the principles, the vitality of life? And we're also oriented to death. What is the purpose and nature of death? How do we come into right relationship with it? Then everything in between starts to fall into place, right? then we become a creative culture, right? And so I feel we're in a time now where we're getting oriented to life and we're getting oriented to death. And as we do that, we start to become a whole culture.
Is there anything that you would share with somebody who's at perhaps an earlier stage of their journey, or even maybe transporting yourself to being able to speak to your younger self? What words of wisdom would you share?
Be at peace, know yourself, and love others.
And before we end this podcast, is there anything that feels important to speak to that we haven't already addressed? I'd love to just give you open space for that.
Well, I feel like it's been a wonderful dialogue that has evoked many things, and because we have a long-standing connection as friends, and I think that's it, to cherish your friendships and to allow them to be part of a pathway to you deepening and knowing yourself. Friendships are just so precious, and the more that we have good friendships around us, I mean, what a gift! Caring, sharing, opening your heart, being vulnerable, and allowing your friendships to lift you up. I just feel like, wow, what a gift that is. And if anything this time is teaching us is how important these connections are. They really sustain us. So thank you. Thank you for being a friend and for creating this possibility for us to dialogue this way.
Oh, this has been such a pleasure. Deep, deep bow to you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.